You hadn't noticed it until you'd moved into your new townhome. See, it was only visible when the light hit your floor just right. That first sunset at your new home you'd watched as satin lines appeared in the vague outline of a person. Reaching down to touch them, you felt the slight gumminess of tape residue and confirmed your worst fears. Someone had outlined a body here. But that didn't make sense. The leasing office would have had to tell you if that was the case, right? You thought about calling just to confirm, but you talked yourself out of it. I mean, surely it had to have been a joke, right? Surely it was just some kind of prank or a Halloween decoration. You scrubbed your kitchen floors well, but the lines never fully went away. You decide to poke a bit of fun at it during your housewarming party because, well, surely it's just a joke. You get some masking tape and tape over the old lines. You tell everyone at the party about it, showing them the pictures of the light hitting it just right. Because if you all laugh about it, if you all poke fun at the absurdity, it has to become less scary, right? But at the end of the night, when your friends all start to leave, you notice someone overstaying his welcome. He's a friend of a friend who looked vaguely familiar, but you didn't know his name. But as each person leaves and no one takes him with them, you start to wonder. Then, when you notice no one saying goodbye to him, or even looking his way, your worst fears are confirmed. You think about asking one of your friends to stay, but you don't because you don't quite believe what's going on until it's just you and him. As the door closes for the last time, the man asks you to get him another beer. You don't know what else to do, so you do it, popping the cap. He thanks you, and then dumps the beer into his mouth, but it falls straight to the floor. The liquid pools on the spot he'd been standing over, the very spot where he'd presumably died. The beer stops perfectly at the edges of the tape, and he slouches down. He lays in the puddle, sloshing around in the liquid, and then he says simply, "Good night." The next morning, you decided you must have imagined the whole thing. Surely the booze was just getting to you. You feel even better when you walk into your kitchen and find no trace of either the man or the tape. But when your kitchen floor catches the light of the rising sun, you see the tape marks are still there. Worse, you can see there are even more of them. You get low to the ground at just the right angle to see what they outline. And to your horror, you make out the shape of the podcast inside your house. By Annie Marie Morgan and Kevin Schrock, with today's episode written by Matt Dymerski, or as you might know him, u/M59gar on Reddit, and music by Hex System. Season 2, Episode 10, Past the Spine. My friend Shannon had been through quite a bit in the past few years, and that was the only reason that I didn't immediately call the police when I stopped by her work and found her halfway through the process of climbing out of a recently deceased corpse. She was drenched in blood, naked and absolutely silent, except for her exhausted breathing as she pulled herself up and out. The morgue around her was otherwise normal, and I saw no indication of exactly how she had fit inside the old man's body. But of course, I was in shock. She had some towels ready nearby, and I handed one to her as I turned respectfully away. "Christ!" She jumped when she saw me standing there with the towel offered toward her. but took it quickly. Shit! What did you see? I stared at the wall of the cold chambers while she dried herself off behind me. I don't know. Shannon, what the hell were you doing? I'm not some kind of freak, she said immediately. Please, just let me explain. Explain? What the hell could you possibly explain about this? I put my shirt over my nose to block out the horrid smell of the open body, but it didn't work. I waited until she shoved her clothes on, then finally turned around. You missed some. Her hair was still drenched in black, red, and yellow fluids, but the best she could do was wrap a second towel around it. Look, it's not some sort of fetish. There's something down there. I fought down the urge to vomit as I looked into the frail old man's still steaming body. His heart, lungs, stomach, pancreas, and intestines had all been coiled around in a haphazard circle covered in various oozes. Down where? In there. Her expression was haunted. Past the spine. Is this a joke? I couldn't believe it. No. I took a step closer and tried to look down the middle of the circle of organs, but there wasn't any gap between them. Then what do you mean? What's down there? She gulped unhappily. I don't know exactly. A space. Narrowing my eyes, I thought about what I'd seen. She hadn't slipped up out of the body sideways. She'd climbed straight up, as if out of a hole. The sight had been very disconcerting. It hadn't been geometrically possible, and my brain was still struggling to make sense of the memory. It was possible she was telling the truth, and there really was some sort of weird hole in this old guy's body. You're serious? I reached for a long metal tool on a tray nearby. That won't work, she said, stopping me. It's made of metal, so it won't work. Only living things work. You can't even reach it wearing gloves. It has to be your bare hand, which is why I think nobody else has found this. Really? I sighed. It was definitely a prank, but I wasn't one to hesitate and get emotional. Fine, let's do this ridiculous nonsense. I took the last step, held my breath against the stench, and reached straight down. After pushing between squishy, wet tissues and organs, my hand came to rest on the hard bones of the old man's spine. I looked to Shannon, but she wasn't laughing. Past the spine, she nodded and gulped audibly. As disgusting as it was, I was determined to see this strange situation through. I moved my hand to the side, and my fingers slipped deeper. What the hell? I frowned and leaned down closer to the corpse as my hand continued to push between what felt like a deep pile of squelching organs. I went down all the way to my shoulder until my short sleeve hit the inside of the old man's back skin and refused to go further. Oh my God, you're telling the truth! I pulled my arm out as fast as I could and held it away to avoid the dripping juices I'd brought with me. My arm was covered in a distinctly thicker goo than the wet ring around my sleeve. Whatever was down there, my non-living shirt had not been able to enter. What is it? Sharon shook her head. That's what I've been trying to figure out. After somebody dies, there's a short window where it, whatever it is, remains open. I took another towel and wiped my arm off as best I could while trying not to gag. Wait, do you mean it isn't just this particular body? Yes. She went over and began sewing up the chest cavity. I'm new here, but I accidentally discovered whatever it is on my second autopsy. She looked past me at the door. My boss is never here and leaves me to do this on my own, so I've been trying to figure out what it is. I dropped vines down a few times, but they only work if they're still attached to the plant, meaning they're still alive. Yeah, and only new corpses work. 96 minutes or so after death, there's a weird tug, and then the vines are snapped off, and I can't feel that weird space with my hand anymore. But I haven't been able to figure anything else out because technology won't go in. It was disgusting, horrifying, and fascinating all at once. What could it possibly be? What could it possibly mean? So you decided to go down there yourself? She nodded. I promise, I'm not a weirdo. I had to know. The thought has been tormenting me for months. What if that's where our soul is? Or what if it's an afterlife of some sort? She looked away. Or what if Brian's still in there somewhere? That sounded like a problem. Brian's dead, Shannon, I told her calmly. You're not going to find him in whatever the hell that is. Softly, she says, You didn't see him die in front of you. She kept her gaze down to avoid looking me in the eye. The world is going crazy. There's hate and delusion everywhere. People need this, now more than ever. If we could find out what happens after death, it could change everything. What else could I say or do? She wasn't going to stop just because I said so. The most I could do was get her to agree to a certain set of precautionary conditions. She'd never gone more than a few moments deep, simply because of the sheer terror. But she would be safer if I was in the morgue to watch over her. We special ordered the longest vine plant we could find, and I waited for her call. It came very late on a Tuesday. I spent 6 minutes getting there and bringing the plant. No one else was around, and she already had the poor teenager cut open and ready, with a white, blood-stained sheet over his head and legs. She disrobed, tied the vine around her left ankle, and then took a deep breath to calm herself. There's at least 30 minutes left on this one, she told me. I set my watch. You've got 7 minutes. No further, just to be safe. She nodded nervously and moved forward. The sight of a person climbing head first down into a steaming open chest cavity really cannot be conveyed in words. I'd popped nausea medication on the way over, and I was glad I had. Her waist almost didn't fit, but I pushed her bare feet down, and she slid out of view between the organs, which congealed back into place once she was gone. The long vine began sliding down between, and I waited with a pounding heart. What was she seeing? What was she doing down there? I was probably imagining it worse than it was, since she had space to turn around the previous time. My mind constructed a vision of a tight, organic tunnel that might close like a muscle and crush her to death. Or perhaps there was an enormous drop into a never-ending void. How could we possibly know until it was too late? My watch counted down the seconds interminably. 4 minutes passed, then 5. The vine was still being pulled in. At 6 minutes, it stopped, and I sighed with relief. That had to mean she was coming back. But she did not emerge at 7 minutes. The tension in my chest rose. At 8 minutes, I began to pull the vine. It moved easily, and I figured I was pulling up slack until a snapped end emerged. Panicking, I reached my hand down. It was still there. She hadn't been trapped. She just lost the vine at a weak point in the plant that we hadn't caught. I waited. At 10 minutes, I began to panic. At 11, I forced myself to focus. At 12, I knew for certain she was in trouble. I paced around for a full 30 seconds before screaming at myself to stop wasting time. I tore off my watch and my clothes and closed my eyes, then basically shoved my arms and head down into the swamp of blood and guts held open on the autopsy table. I found the teenager's spine and pushed my way past it. This time, I didn't stop. It was easier than I expected. Despite the pressure from wet flesh on every side, I slid right in. The knot of vine tied around my ankle got caught on spiny bones, but I reached back through the pile of organs and freed it with terrified fingers. It was only when I fell further and felt air on my face that I finally took an explosive breath and opened my eyes. The air was 1,000 years beyond foul, but breathable, just like she'd told me. It smelled and felt like breathing in rotten corpse and dying, diseased flesh as a veritable fog, a blood mist. The sight was similar. Shannon had also told me that the place had a dim crimson glow about it, omnipresent and without source, and by this light I saw choking miasma in 2 directions. Bloodless arteries opened to my left and right, neither big enough to fit a person, until I pushed in and the muscle-bound walls relaxed to give me access. I followed the remains of her snapped vine. More than anything, I wished I had clothes on. Every single surface was alive, pulsing with a distant heartbeat and secreting dark substances that were strangely hot, cold, or even numbing to the touch. Being naked in an environment like that made me feel vulnerable in a way that brought out terror at every unexpected noise, sight, and texture. I cursed Shannon's decision-making more than a few times, that was for sure, but I wasn't going to let her die down here. Her vine entered what looked like a hollow groove into a massive bone, and I was happy to just be on a solid surface as I crawled between increasingly narrow white walls lit in red. This tunnel had been carved. I could see that in the spiraling notches all around. Had the muscle tunnels also been drilled out, but then later healed away the scars? It was as if some worm or parasite had dug its way through a dimension of flesh, and we were merely following in its ancient wake. The smooth bone began to steepen, and I guessed that Shannon might have slipped and slid here. Carefully bracing myself on the spiral notches, I worked my way down the incline, with my vine still tightly bound to my ankle. And it was good I did. The bone spiral tunnel ended in a steep, fleshy drop-off. Shannon was there below, clinging to a solid white spur. I was still inside the bone itself, so I could only see down, but I carefully moved to reach her hand with mine. She stared up at me, with horror in her eyes. Her voice was awed, distant, and distorted by the rot-congested air. "Don't look out!" "What do you mean?" I called to her. As I leaned out of the bone, the view away from the wall of flesh began to open up. I'd finally reached an open place rather than a tunnel, and I could sense that if I turned my head, I would see a tremendous vista. It was the same sense I'd had a few times in my life while riding a ski lift or walking past the window on a plane. All I had to do was glance. She screamed again, "Don't look!" For once in my life, I listened to someone else. I didn't look. Our hands met, but both were slippery. I tried to rub the liquids off on my skin, but that didn't work. Everything was wet and disgusting. I leaned down further and offered an elbow. "Wrap your entire arm around my elbow," I shouted. The act made the world beyond us open up a little more, and I could feel horrific sights beginning to piece themselves together in the corners of my eye. I couldn't quite tell what was happening out there, but if I so much as darted my gaze, she grabbed my arm and then screamed in my ear, "Don't look! Don't you look! Damn it!" What had that been? She'd said a word, but the meaning and the intonations had been alien to my mind. By the look on her face, she'd heard it too. I pulled her up with all my might, and the nightmare world outside our bone tunnel receded. Together, we climbed our way back up the spiral carvings, then crawled as fast as we could along the bleeding muscle. The living world around us did not seem to react to us or care about us in any way. For some reason, I'd expected anger or hunger or at least something. If it was alive, if it was conscious, if it was sentient, then we were nothing at all to it. We reached the point where the vine rose up into a seething mass of dark organs, and I pushed her up ahead of me. Then, for some reason, I turned, and I looked down the other direction, the way I had not gone when I first arrived. The crimson-lit silhouette of a vaguely teenaged boy sat, curled up and crying at a curve in the tunnel. He raised his head, as if he could somehow sense my looking at him. He began to crawl forward. "Help me!" Frozen and aghast, I waited. "Help me!" he screamed again as he came nearer. "Oh, what's happening? I was in the car and there was this loud crunch and I hit my head and I thought for sure He paused, hearing his own words. "What is that? And why can't I say... Oh, no! Why? No!" He looked at me from 2 arm lengths away. "Are we in hell?" I didn't know what to tell him. I'd never seen such agony and loss in another human being's body language before, and he still didn't know the truth. I gulped down my paralysis. "Can you see me?" He nodded. "Help me!" What could I tell him? I chose my words carefully. "I don't think I can." "Why?" He whimpered so sadly that I thought it would break my heart. "Why can't you help me?" I shook with a portion of the pain that I was about to give him. "You don't have a face." He just sat there, sobbing, as I leapt up and climbed. I knew that the sound of hopelessness would haunt me the rest of my life. It was unlike anything a human being on earth could make, for it was absolute, and it was forever. I pushed out of the corpse on the table and crashed my way to the cold, hard, dry floor. The impact hurt, but nothing had ever felt so safe and secure. Shannon sat curled up in a corner, much like the boy I'd seen, and she'd given no thought to putting her clothes back on or getting the dozen kinds of plasma and blood off. She could only stare at the floor in shock, rock back and forth, and murmur. "He wants me to tell people about him." "Who?" I asked her. "The teenager? He wouldn't survive here even if we brought him with us." "No," she whispered. "He wants me to tell people about him. He saw into me when I looked at him. He put his fingers in my gray matter and massaged my brain tissue without ever touching me. He said the Bible and the Quran and the Torah, they're close, but we got it slightly wrong. There's a few things backwards." She stopped rocking in place and stared me in the eye. "We're not going to tell anyone about, are we?" I cut a towel and wrapped it around her. "No, we won't say a word." And at the time I actually believed that. I thought I'd gotten away with it by not looking. But the corner of my vision did absorb some small portion of whatever nightmare she witnessed. That's why, after several weeks of resisting, I can't help but write this. I simply feel compelled to tell people what's happened, and to tell people that exists. So now you know too. I hope that's not a problem. Thank you for tuning into this episode of The Podcast Inside Your House. To hear every tale of terror as they're released, subscribe to our show on your podcast app or on YouTube, or follow us on Facebook and Blue Sky. And until next time, remember that some gravestones are better left unturned.